Well, hello everyone. Just to introduce myself, my name's Dennis Fansett and I'm from the Diocese of Newcastle Generous Giving Team. And it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you online today, exploring the place generosity and generous giving should play in our lives as Christians. And I do want to start by saying thank you actually to everyone who gives generously to their parish or benefice, whether it be money, time, skills, expertise, encouraging and affirming things you say, whether it's something everyone sees and knows about or whether it's private, seen only by God. Nevertheless, I want to say thank you so much for being on board, for your faithfulness, which God sees and values so much. But I'm also aware that for some of us, if somebody says, I'm going to talk about generosity, it can be a temptation to switch off. We might think, oh no, it's going to talk about money. That's not really something I want to listen to. The last thing we want is someone else telling us what we should be doing with our money. Well, you'll be pleased to know that whilst money comes into all areas of life, that's not really my subject for today. But what I do want to do is to raise some issues which I hope will deepen our understanding of God and how we develop as his disciples. And to illustrate that point, I'm going to start off by telling you a little story. Now, this is a true story. It's about two people, and I knew the people, one of them particularly well. One of them is an Anglican, one is a Baptist. Actually, the story starts with the Baptist. He was a missionary working abroad with the Baptist Missionary Society, but sadly, he had a breakdown, quite serious in fact, and he and his family needed to be returned to this country with some urgency. And it so happened that the Baptist Missionary Society have a network of safe houses around the country for such eventualities. And unbeknown to me, one of them was in the town where I used to live. And so this is where this man and his family came. But the local Baptist church, which you might have expected him to attend every Sunday, they didn't have a pastor at that particular time. We would call it an interregnum or a vacancy. So our Baptist friend and his supervisors in the Missionary Society recommended he should just go to another church where he wouldn't be known and he wouldn't be leaned upon to do all sorts of stuff that people might expect clergy to do. And that's how he came to the church I was part of at the time and how I got to know him. Now, a year or so passed and our friend made good progress and he slowly recovered. But with his recovery came the realisation that actually he wasn't cut out to be a missionary. He'd need to resign from the Baptist Missionary Society, and that meant giving up his house and finding a new job. And that is not as easy as it sounds, especially when all you've ever done is to have been an ordained pastor and you've just had a breakdown. It's not a great CV actually to be applying for jobs. Now there were some part-time or 0-hour jobs that he could apply for, but they weren't going to pay enough for him to find somewhere else for him and his family to live. So we were praying. And meanwhile, the deadline for giving up his house, which had already been very graciously extended several times by the Missionary Society, but eventually the final deadline drew closer and closer until it was just a couple of weeks away. And that's when our friend got a phone call. It was from a man he didn't know, someone he'd never spoken to before. Actually, it was from the Anglican, and that chap said to him, look, I've heard you're looking for somewhere to live. Well, let me tell you, I've got a new job and I'm moving away with my family, but for various reasons, we don't want to sell our house. Would you like to come and live in our house rent-free? Well, our Baptist friend was overwhelmed. He was quite tearful, in fact. It was such an amazing answer to prayer. And within a few days, he was going round to pick up the key. And then after he had been shown round the house, told how everything worked, he turned to the Anglican and he said, why are you doing this? I mean, you don't know me. I'm not part of your church. I'm not even part of your denomination. Why are you being so generous to me, someone you've never even met? And the Anglican replied, and he said, I'm being generous to you as an expression of the fact that God has been generous to me. And you see, there you have it. When we understand that God's been generous to us, it is surely our natural reaction that we too, in turn, will wish to be generous. And don't forget, that was an off-the-cuff answer. He wasn't given 30 minutes to prepare or to rush home and to look up generosity in his theology books. It was a simple answer to an honest question. I'm being generous to you because God's been generous to me. Now, you may be thinking this is all very well for people who've got lots of money to start off with. They can afford to be generous. But what about ordinary people like us? What about people for whom money is tight and getting tighter? Well, let me tell you, several years ago, I was privileged to spend some months in Hong Kong. And whilst I was there, I attended the church that had been started by the British missionary Jackie Pullinger and her amazing work amongst heroin addicts. And many of those addicts had found faith through Jackie's work, and they'd started coming to church. But in Hong Kong, there's no welfare state, and if you had no job, you had absolutely nothing. And yet there was a song they used to sing at that church. You might know it. It has the line, and now let the poor say I am rich. And those former drug addicts with absolutely nothing, they used to sing that song with gusto. I mean, they'd got it. They had found God, and they knew God had been generous to them. They considered themselves to be rich. Wherever and however they could, they gave back. So today, let's ask ourselves, are we also people of faith? Has God been generous to us? Has he been generous to me? Have I found him? Have I discovered him? Have I had an encounter with him, whether that came initially from a single moment of revelation or explanation, or whether it came over a period of years, as it did with the first disciples and for many of us who have grown up in the church. Because once we know that God, through his gift of salvation, has been overwhelmingly generous to us, surely our natural, our only response is to want to be generous back to him. So let's give as a natural response to God's overwhelming generosity to us. Let's support the vision and the mission of this parish or benefice. Let's give our time, our money, our skills to allow us to do even more. Why? Because God's been generous to us. Hey, thank you so much for listening to me today. It's been a privilege to be talking to you online. God bless you. Amen.